You're listening to Skills World, the podcast. News, views, reviews and interviews in association with FE News.
Hello and welcome to Skills World, the podcast. I'm Tom Bewick, and over the next few episodes we are here at FAB 2019, the annual conference of the Federation of Awarding Bodies. So I'm talking to some of the keynote speakers and the panellists, and I'm delighted to be joined by two of our excellent keynote speakers, and that is Sharon Blyfield, who is Head of Apprenticeships and Early Careers with Coca Cola Enterprises. She'll explain to me shortly what the difference is between that and the Coca Cola soft drink. But welcome, Sharon. And Lucy Hunte, who's the National Programme Manager but she's got a little title that says Apprenticeships Talent for Care, just in case anybody in the NHS is a little bit confused about where your focus is. So Lucy, welcome to Skills World. So let's start with your day jobs then, shall we? Sharon, tell me about what life's like running your particular part of the business in probably one of the best known iconic brands in the world.
Thank you for that. Yes, it is one of the best known iconic brands, you know.
You didn't pay me for that, by the way. I'm not doing any product placement, but it is true. Yeah, everybody's heard of Coca-Cola.
Absolutely. So my day-to-day job is quite varied. So I am responsible for apprenticeships, whether that be as part of early careers or for existing employees, for the whole contracting piece that comes with that. I'm also responsible for work experience, interns, anything that relates to young people starting in the world of work. So it's really, really varied.
It's really varied. And we'll drill down a little bit into that when we talk about some of the challenges around delivering apprenticeships and qualifications for your particular workforce. But broadly, I mean, how many employees, how many trainees are we talking about that come typically under your purview then?
So in GB, we have just under 4,000 employees. From an early careers apprenticeship perspective, we have 62 on programme, and then we have about another 20 to 30 existing employees who are also undertaking apprenticeships. So it's a small proportion compared to the amount of employees that we have.
But still, I mean, quite a substantial number of learners, trainees to be concerned about. Lucy, National Health Service, God bless the NHS. Often described as the second biggest employer after the Chinese People's Liberation Army. I'm not sure if that's a true factoid, but still, it's a very large organisation. You're a levy-based employer in apprenticeships. What's your day job typically like?
So at Health Education England, we are mandated by Department of Health to support the NHS with all aspects of apprenticeship implementation and delivery. So you name it, we do it. I think it's operational strategic support, helping them utilise the levy, working with trailblazers, working with training providers, and just making sure that the NHS can really embrace the opportunities of apprenticeships.
And one of the amazing things that I hadn't realised about the NHS, which you talked about in your presentation, Lucy, was the idea that there's 350 roles within the National Health Service that you've identified. Mm-hmm. Certainly for my young daughters growing up, they tend to think the NHS is just about doctors, nurses and patients. So you've got one consumer and two roles. But just tell us about then some of the careers and occupational roles that exist in the NHS.
Well, obviously with a huge focus on clinical, but if you think of an NHS Trust, or which could be a group of hospitals, you're going to have facilities, you're going to have gardeners, you're going to have childcare and potentially the nurseries, HR, IT, finance, so I think there's a lot of kind of core blue collar roles as well, which are often not thought of as typical NHS roles, but that's a huge proportion of the workforce.
It's almost like a small city to some extent, isn't it? With not only the volume, the numbers of people actually working, but just the complexity as well of the skill sets that are required.
Yeah, I mean, some trusts can have between 10 and 15,000 people in one organisation, and so multiply that by 263 different trusts across the UK. It's a huge workforce that we're dealing with.
How many trusts did you say?
263.
263. So that's a lot of, obviously within the National Health Service framework of patient care being free at the point of use, you've essentially got 230 odd business units, all of whom that are making those workforce development decisions, or is that where your role comes in, trying to coordinate things?
Yeah, we try to coordinate things. Ultimately, that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is that the NHS is one organisation, but they're not. They're all very separate companies. And then you're not forgetting primary care, which is made up of SMEs, GP practices, pharmacists as well. So we're supporting those as well.
And then if you added social care into that, you've got an even bigger sector. That's public sector. Sharon, I mean, you're obviously part of a sort of private enterprise, but nevertheless, probably some similarities with the NHS, large corporation, big talent, skills needs. You'll have turnover issues, but you'll also have recruitment and induction issues. You'll have to think about training across the piece. I mean, have you mapped the number of occupational roles in a massive corporation like Coca Cola?
We haven't mapped it the same way as the NHS, and it was quite interesting what Lucy was saying in terms of all the support functions. As I talked to a lot of people outside of the soft drinks industry about the types of roles, we talk about the career highway because, we have also those same support functions, so finance, IT. People just seem to think soft drinks get made, but the question is who actually makes them and then how are they delivered? So we have microbiologists who need to check all of our products for us. We even have lawyers because, we're a huge brand. And so therefore we need to have a legal team behind us. And people are really, really surprised when they see our career map that shows kind of all of the opportunities and the pathways that an organisation like Coca Cola has. Most people just don't realise it.
Absolutely. So we're at a conference obviously where there's a focus on qualifications, and you've given us a particular input from an employer perspective. I mean, both of you as employers, start with you, Sharon. What do you look for in a qualification? I mean, how does it get past your, if you like, fit for purpose test as an employer?
So my starting point really is with our training providers, and we talk about what's the skills we need today, but more importantly, what are the skills we need for the future? And then what's actually out in the marketplace that will allow us to be able to deliver against those skills. And this is a new, for us at Coca Cola, this is a really new area, purely and simply because we make soft drinks, we don't do education. And we rely on the training providers to say, well, this is the right qualification for you. But with that comes its own challenges because we will always then question, well, why is that the right qualification? What's it going to give to us? What's it going to give to the individual that's getting it? And why do they actually need that particular qualification? And isn't there a different qualification? And I have to say, it's a minefield because it's not our world, it's their world. They're the subject matter experts. But sometimes I do question whether they really even know themselves what's the right qualification. Because unless you understand our industry, it's very difficult to tell us what we need.
Sounds from what you're saying there, then, that there's a lot of choice out there, but also from your perspective, some complexity, and navigating that choice and complexity is that an issue for you then as an employer?
It's definitely an issue for us as an employer because we have our engineering side of the business, a huge part for us, yet we have training providers who are very, very good, training providers who are average, and training providers who are the best of the rest. That's the way I describe it. And they all have a different pathway from an engineering perspective that they want us to go down. All of our lines, all of our manufacturing is identical, regardless of where you go in the country. So I just want one qualification that fits that. But no training provider provides me with that one qualification because they all want to do something different.
That's interesting. You talked there about the training providers, best of the rest, and you'll be aware that all training providers, certainly those that are in the publicly funded game, will have to be inspected by Ofsted, and there are these 4 ratings outstanding. Yes. Do those ratings have any bearing on your decision? I mean, is that something you look at when you're choosing a training provider?
It is critical for us. So we had an issue February 2017 where one of the training providers, I won't name them, they were checked by Ofsted, they lost all of their funding, and overnight we had to identify a new training provider. So when I asked the questions internally of who checked their Ofsted rating, it wasn't even on our radar to even think about it.
Interesting, yeah.
So now we make sure that's something we check, but not just that headline rating, but we drill down into all of the subsectors. And quite recently, we had one location in the southeast who had a good Ofsted rating, but when I looked at it from an apprenticeship perspective, it said requires improvement.
Because you've got a framework that's been applied to the provider, of which apprenticeships is one of several areas
Correct.
that the Ofsted are looking at, absolutely. But it is actually a relatively new thing that even Ofsted now separates out and does measure the apprenticeship impact, which, as you rightly say, in that particular instance, it requires improvement. Lucy, these 230 sort of semi-autonomous business units within the National Health Service, is there a similar pattern that Sharon's identified there, where you've essentially got workforce development managers locally that want to choose their own qualifications, choose their own providers, or is there some kind of coordination, quality check on how they are accessing those services?
So it is more of a focus to have that coordination and kind of standardisation, but similar to what Sharon's been saying is that you've got a generic qualification which needs to be bespoke for a GP practice as opposed to a large trust. It's essentially the same qualification, but you want to make sure that it's fit for purpose and any additional modules or units can be added or removed as the employer sees fit. So I think that's been part of the challenge, that until the levy and the money was really kind of in our court, a lot of our employers were reluctant to negotiate on that or didn't feel they could. And certainly in some of the more rural areas, we've got real challenges where, they might have one provider who's not very good, has got a poor Ofsted and, doesn't do work-based delivery or, doesn't offer any flexibility. And so that can be a real challenge.
Something interesting, though, that Sharon said about the provider wanting to, in effect, provide the qualification. And you look at that and you think, well, surely what matters more than anything, particularly in an employer-driven system, is what's the qualification that you want to provide on behalf of your employees, albeit you'll need the help of that intermediary and that provider to deliver the training. But then that also requires, and I think you also hinted at this, Sharon, some kind of knowledge about the qualification. You need to understand your own needs and not just the needs of what's out there in the marketplace. Lucy, I mean, does that ring any bells with you around, how you navigate through the system, how you make sure you get the right qualification in the right place at the right time? And, do you feel that you're sufficiently empowered as the employer on behalf of the employee, or in some cases with the employee, to make those kind of decisions?
I think we're getting there in terms of that. We are encouraging trusts much more to collaborate on a regional basis. If they've got potentially small numbers, 2 per trust, but suddenly you've got 10 trusts working together and that becomes 20, 30, 40, then that's a completely different position for you to go to the training provider and say, no, we do want this bespoke programme rather than off the shelf. But I do think there's challenges, there's variances of quality which we're aware of. And what we are also finding is that someone might write a really, really good bid, but once they've awarded the contract, the delivery is not what they anticipated or promised that it would be. And then you're kind of locked into that agreement and it's just a never-ending nightmare, really. So I think
Indeed.
The quality is really, really important for us. And we do get let down. And certainly if you've been having long conversations, getting senior managers on board, and then you get a training provider in and the quality's not there and they pull the plug, then, all that hard work and planning has fallen by the wayside.
We've all been struck, haven't we, by the silver-tongued pitch teams that come in. It doesn't matter whether you're procuring a design agency or some new training provision. I think we've all probably been caught in that trap from time to time. Let's come on to an issue, Lucy, about the Level 2 business administration. So historically, that was a apprenticeship framework, and I know from obviously reading the press, like we all do, in this sector, that there's quite a bit of bad blood out there about the fact that employers, and not just the NHS, but lots of employers actually are saying, why can't we have a Level 2 business admin standard as part of the new apprenticeship? After all, as you say, you've now got the Levy digital credits, the money in your account. Why can't you go out and purchase that Level 2? Why do you think there's such opposition in the bureaucracy in the Institute for Apprenticeships to that type of apprenticeship standard? Without putting you on the spot.
No, I'm to be diplomatic.
This isn't going very far.
I've been very involved in the Level 2 Trailblazer, and to be honest, I can't understand the reason. We had a meeting with Rob Nish a couple of weeks ago, and I specifically said, is there a hidden agenda? Because if this is truly an employer-led process, then why are you not listening to the 100-odd employers that we've got as part of this group that want this as a vital entry route? There was lots of blustering, and I assure you, that's not the case. But to me, I can't see why they wouldn't have this entry route. There's so much focus on getting young people into work. And, Level 2 is that entry route. And what they don't seem to understand is that a big part of the Level 2 is the employability. So if you are reaching, NEETs and those that are kind of coming out of care and you actually want to have that pastoral support to get them into employment, then they need that Level 2 because the Level 3 is a step too far. And certainly if they haven't got the maths and English, it's not possible anyway. But yeah, I really can't see any valid reason why they don't want that route there, unless it's because they know that the numbers will be huge and there'll be even less surplus levy to spend.
One of the theories that I've heard around it is that the Institute, with its remit to not only develop the standards, and there's obviously a lot of potentially there under the cosh to make sure that the new apprenticeship system, which has been gradually phased in, not just with the levy, but also with the new standards over recent years, they need to push the kind of skills supply chain up a peg or two so that all this reform, all this extra money in 10 years' time when we look back is worth it. So one theory I've heard is, well, it's to do with the fact that potentially level 2 isn't as productivity enhancing. This is from their perspective, as you've seen with some of the new standards, a very healthy chunk of new starts and standards are in the management space. Of course, the NHS also has managers at all levels. But just listening to you there, Lucy, I think it really struck with me how what you're saying is, well, that's all fine. But actually, as an employer, what we're doing is we're offering entry routes into our very complex National Health Service in occupational roles, like the 350, not all of them, but a fair chunk of them, that otherwise would not be open to people who, for example, didn't leave school with GCSEs, A-levels and a university degree and studied medicine for 5 years at a med school. So to you, does it feel like this is potentially quite a pernicious policy because it is kicking away that ladder of opportunity from people that otherwise would, certainly in the old system, they got access to that?
No, exactly. And for us, it's been a vital entry route for many years now. We've had, numbers in excess of 10,000 a year.
It's a big number, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll be effectively cutting off that route. IFA have said consider the level 2 customer service as an option, but we've actually got to the point now where we've had people on that programme are getting to endpoint assessment and are not being able to evidence their customer facing role, because if they're in a purely back office admin role, it's not customer service, is it? Yes, you've got internal customers, but I think that's disadvantaging them. But yeah, for us, and also if they come in as a level 2 business admin, they're learning the world of work, they're learning that responsibility, and then they can progress into other roles, and I think that's part of the thing. Once you've got them in, you want to nurture them. They could then go into clinical roles, they could follow the administration route, but it's just actually that foot in the door. And if we don't have that route, they're not going to get through the door.
But wasn't the apprenticeship reforms about creating a level playing field and giving those opportunities? And as you tinker with the system, it appears to be taking away those opportunities rather than creating the pathways for young people, and not even just young people, but those who weren't academically strong at school and who want to get some form of qualification to be able to prove that actually they are capable in a vocational way of doing it. That's closing the door on being able to do
and
that.
I should have mentioned that, because for us as well, it is a vital route for existing staff that are in auxiliary roles and cleaning roles, support roles, that want to move into administration roles, might not have the massive English, might not have been in academia for a long time, and that is the way to ease them into that. So it is for existing staff as well as new recruits. And yeah, I think it's a travesty.
Well, it sounds like, from sort of just talking to two major employers here, there's still more work to be done around, on the one hand, the rhetoric about an employer-driven apprenticeship model. To be fair, there are more standards being developed now by employer groups than there were under the old system. 700 or so potentially will be approved. That's twice the number that they have in Germany, although obviously it includes these degree level apprenticeships, which isn't necessarily a feature of these Germanic or continental systems of apprenticeship. But switching on now to the quality assurance challenge and also the funding, because to some extent they're related, although we'll come on later to talk about the levy in particular. But Sharon, quality assurance, now, I mean, you work in a sector, in an industry for a major global corporation that absolutely prides itself on, to the nth degree, getting every single, whether it's a soft drink or whatever it is within the group, the product that you're putting out there into the marketplace has some very exacting standards, and you will have a very, very exacting way of quality assuring those products before they get anywhere near a consumer or a restaurant. So what is it about the apprenticeship model currently that we just seem to not quite have got there? I mean, we have still this ongoing debate about quality. Have we got quality in apprenticeships? There's no shortage of bodies running around saying, we're here to look at your quality. We have obviously the endpoint assessment organisations, which strictly speaking are not quality assurance, but they are testing the occupational competence of the apprentice. They're actually to give both the apprentice and you guys as employers that sort of satisfaction that what it said on the tin, the standard, the assessment plan is absolutely being delivered. And then you've got these checkers on behalf of good old Her Majesty's government and the taxpayer funds that have gone into it saying, yes, these bodies are actually delivering to the standards and the assessment plans in the way that the employers envisaged they would. Now, that sounds actually quite straightforward in theory, and no one, I don't think, would disagree with that. I mean, you probably wouldn't disagree with that. However, from your perspective, is that how it's working on the ground in practice?
No, it definitely isn't. And
I'm not surprised to hear that, by the way.
So quality assurance for us as an organisation and a brand is absolutely critical. We don't want any of our products to go out into the marketplace that aren't fit for purpose. And so we operate under one standard. My very limited knowledge from an education perspective is that everyone is all chasing after the same thing, but they're all going in different directions to get them there. And it doesn't feel like that there's one overall body that says this is quality assurance, this is what's going to happen, and you are all absolutely following that path. There seems to be lots of pockets and everyone going, I'm wonderful, aren't I great? But they're all doing it differently. And I think that's a real challenge. So if you kind of took that commercial lens and translated it into the academic world and looked at how commercial undertakes it, there would be some critical learnings, I think, within this space. But at the moment, that commercial mindset is probably more about the pound notes than the quality assurance.
And even in other parts of the education system, Ofsted, we talked about earlier, that there aren't several different versions of Ofsted running around quality checking our schools and our training providers. There's one body. I think that's your point, Sharon, about a single approach, a standard, and presumably if you have the single body and the standard, you can then clearly, you know whose feet to hold to the fire if it's not going right. I mean, do you share that perspective?
I do, and I think
Lucy?
For a lot of the employers that we work with, they don't know what good looks like. So how can you measure what service and delivery that you're getting if and Ofsted, I think, is fine, but again, some of our trusts, we've got 86 employer providers now as trusts. They come in, they've got huge safeguarding policies, huge safeguarding, getting marked down by Ofsted because it doesn't reference apprenticeships directly. But obviously, as an NHS trust, safeguarding is number one priority. So just little intricacies like that, I think there should be some more support and governance. One of my concerns at the moment is actually around, obviously, we've got all these new degree level apprenticeships. Who's quality assuring them? Because I certainly know that QAA don't have the same mindset as Ofsted in terms of what good looks like in terms of provision. And when I've sat in on some levels that, you've got a professor delivering a level 5 qualification, they don't mention knowledge, skills and behaviours once in the whole session.
Right.
And you're thinking you're just delivering your traditional degrees and calling it an apprenticeship.
So the danger there actually is what we see is increasingly the apprenticeship levy budget being used up by, albeit on paper look like perfectly sound degree level qualifications, or in this case apprenticeships, but actually, as you say, they're degrees. They're not necessarily apprenticeships because they're not following the same set of rigor and process and standards of, for example, threshold competence in an occupation, which is, as we know, the whole reason why employers wanting to get involved in the apprenticeship reforms is this sort of sense of they're defining not just the job for here and now, but over a period of time within an industry, what occupational competence looks like, which is different, obviously, from having academic skills and abilities as well.
Yeah, I mean, and in the NHS, that could be the difference between life or death. If someone has been signed off as clinically competent and then they make an error, there is consequences.
There is, and of course we've seen those high-profile cases in the media over the years, and we know what effect these things can have when they don't go to plan. Funding, then, I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it, that we've got this levy that's raised £2.5 billion, and it's only been in existence for 3 years. And there's a sort of paradox because, on the one hand, the rumour out there, and it is very much a rumour because I haven't actually seen anything from the government published on this that says, yes, the levy pot is either bust or it's about to go bust. But I think people in our world, in skills world, who talk about these things say, yeah, there's all these constraints because look at the fact that small companies, the non-levy employers, find it difficult, even though they're offering apprenticeship slots, can't access the cash. We've had this slightly bizarre situation, haven't we, where the levy-based employers, certainly the ones that haven't used up their levy-based funds, because there's a sunset clause that comes down after 24 months.
Yeah.
good old Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, always likes to help itself to your money if you don't spend it in time or to the given criteria. So millions and millions of pounds have sort of disappeared off somewhere. No one quite knows where that cash has gone. I mean, surely there's got to be a better way of funding apprenticeships. I mean, in principle, Sharon, do you support the levy? Do you think it's a sound concept? It just needs perhaps a bit of an overhaul, tweaking a little bit?
I think the levy has actually been a good thing for business because it's made us all really rethink the approach that we take in terms of bringing in young people into our organisation and opening up some of those roles that you might have previously maybe gone to somebody with a little bit more experience. You're thinking, actually, no, this will actually help my succession. It's helping to support development of existing employees. I think the levy is a good thing. However, because there is always going to be a however on the levy, the government have taken the money once from the company. Now they're taking it back a second time. Now funds are starting to expire. I think the whole expiring of funds is absolutely ludicrous in the beginning of a process that organisations are just trying to get their heads around. And I've asked the question several times, is there any opportunity to extend rather than claw back so soon? The answer has been no, and there are no plans to change that. So that's actually quite frustrating. Then I'm hearing that very same rumour, and I've been hearing it probably for the last 12 months that we're going to run out of money. And I think to myself, well, how are you going to run out of money? Because most of the organisations I speak to aren't spending their levy. They're spending a proportion of it, but probably 75-80% of it is still sitting in their account.
And ministers originally gave the impression, when they sort of sold the levy to business and certainly to the CBI, was this notion of, sure, we levy you, we tax you, we outsource, we take that 0.5% of your payroll above £3 million. We set up a nice digital account for you with your apprenticeship credits clearly identified, and away you go. You spend it a bit like a voucher that you might give someone as a gift, goes down to the local supermarket and uses the voucher in that way. The difference, it appears, the way in practice it now works is it's like saying to that person who you give the £100 voucher to, oh, by the way, by the time you get down to the supermarket, it's only going to be worth 40 quid. I mean, is that a similar story with the National House? I think I've heard you present somewhere, actually, Lucy, the figure in terms of how much the levy's worth to the NHS. Do you recall that figure?
200 million.
So it's a lot of cash, isn't it?
I totally agree with Sharon in terms of the expiry date. Certainly for us.
Have you handed money back?
Yep. And
we have as well.
Yeah, and we've certainly, at the beginning, we didn't have the standards available to use. So that's why we think, if we'd had a longer period before they expired, we'd have had a chance to implement more. One thing we are doing, though, is facilitating levy transfers to SMEs. So where they can't access funding for whatever reasons, the GP practice or the pharmacy can get a transfer from a trust, and then that allows them to access the provision.
And for those listening that aren't familiar with the detail, that the transfer is essentially, is it 10% or more now?
Up to 25%.
So it's up to 25. So 25% of that 200 odd million, you could, as you say, in effect, pass it on. Gifted on to the supply chain that's coming to. And has that been taken up enthusiastically?
It has, because I think certainly we've had a lot of issues where SMEs couldn't access any local provision because their local college hadn't got any money left, and that was a real challenge. We've got people that they're wanting to sign up and actually can't do it, so we've had to step in as an interim measure. But again, I think that's all part of employers not acting how ESFA imagined them to, and that's leading to the bigger picture in terms of why we're hearing these rumours about not enough money. My last off the record conversation I had was they think it's going to be overspent by 50 million.
Well, it'll be interesting to see when we do eventually get a stable government with a spending review and a budget. We might actually find out the detail on that. Sharon, one last question for you. If there was one thing you could change about Skills World as a private company, obviously interacting with all sorts of public bodies, we've talked about some of them on this podcast, but if there was one thing, Gavin Williamson, the Secretary of State currently, said to you, Sharon, what can we change to make your life at Coca Cola Enterprises and that of your talent chain easier? What would you do?
So I'm going to link this back to the apprenticeship levy, and it's to take some of the shackles off of it. So we have sales apprentices, and one of the things that we would really love to be able to do is to take some of our levy use it for driving lessons. It might seem really bizarre, but use it for driving lessons for those who can't afford to pay, £200-300 now in the hope that they pass their test.
That's just going for the test. There's also the driving lessons. It's probably
Absolutely.
around, I sort of figure about £2,000 on average it costs people to learn to drive. That's a lot for a 17, 18, 19-year-old, isn't it?
Absolutely. And especially if you come from a family background that just doesn't have that sort of money, those individuals have the passion and the drive to go out there and be successful. And we'd love to be able to offer them a sales job, but they can't drive. Yeah, I'm giving money back to the government that I could utilise to be able to provide driving lessons. So if they took the shackles off of the levy and allow employers to be able to do with the money what it was intended, which was to create a level playing field, that, I think, would open up a world of opportunity.
But it sounds to me that from that sort of suggestion is really what you're saying is, I mean, it's called the Apprenticeship Levy, but in that model, effectively what you're saying is it's more of a workforce development levy. It's a skills training fund, albeit paid for by employers, but then more flexibility. Lucy, does that fly as an idea for you? And if it was implemented, do you not think we'd probably have to look at the scope of such a levy? Because the rumour is £50 million potentially overspent. Who knows what the real figure is? I've got to say, personally, I find it extraordinary that if you've got employers out there that want to actually provide an opportunity, either it's because it's for an existing employee who's going to upskill as a result of the training, or more importantly, we want to see more of them take on younger people in entry-level roles coming into your particular sectors. Why on earth would the government not fund that? I mean, surely the alternative to that, and we've, I think hinted at this in what you've been saying over the last 10 minutes, is potentially what we're talking about is people claiming benefits or being on the dole or frankly just deciding not to be part of the workforce at all, even though historically, of course, we've got relatively high employment rates. Lucy, what's your one thing?
Stop tinkering with things. Let things embed. I do think the levy has been a positive thing, but I think the pace of the reform, switching from frameworks to standards, why do everything at the same time? It has been a complete minefield for employers the last couple of years. I know we've got T-levels on the horizon. It's just, it just seems to be that they're changing too much. I think just let things embed. And, going back to Sharon's point, I think in terms of flexibility, we would definitely welcome that, to be able to fund roles for the pastoral support if you want to have large numbers of young people coming into trusts. And for an example, the nursing associate or the nursing degree, that equates to up to 60% off the job. To be able to allow that employer to backfill or fund someone when that person's away from the workplace for 60% of the time, it means that it'll be a lot more viable and we'll see the numbers fly.
Well, when I tag Gavin Williamson on his Twitter account to your podcast, I will draw reference to the fact that you've come up with two very workable ideas about, on the one hand, how do you grow flexibility in the system, take the shackles off employers, and on the other, how do ministers in particular, because often they're the ones that start the tinkering, they're the ones that have the big ideas and want the legacy projects and all the rest of it. So Gavin Williamson, if you're listening, flexibility and stability is what our two major employers are telling not just the world of qualifications, but actually the broader learning and skills system. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. Sharon Blyfield, Head of Apprenticeships and Early Careers at Coca Cola Enterprises. Lucy Hunte, National Programme Manager, Apprenticeship Talent for Care with our National Health Service. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Sign up to Skills World at www.fenews.co.uk.